Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast, Life is a Story We Tell Ourselves. Our guest today is Professor Aaron Dominguez of the Catholic University of America. On today's program, we will discuss the relationship between science and reason, the Higgs boson, once wrongly called the God particle, and whether or not the discovery of the Higgs field has advanced our understanding of reality. Dr. Dominguez, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks, Don, for inviting me on your show.
Is there a moment in time that influenced you to become a physicist? Was there some seminal moment or something that happened that set you off in this direction?
I'd say that I think I came out of the womb wanting to be a scientist. So it's always been kind of part of who I am ever since I was a little boy, I think. And you know how your grandmothers or your grandparents tell you stories about yourself when you were a little kid, and they tell you the story over and over and over, right, throughout your life. Right. And you're like, Grandma, I already heard that story, but it's a way of them reminding you who you are. And so my maternal grandmother, Minerva Dominguez, would always tell this story about, because I lived with them for a while when I was little, about how I wanted to know how electricity worked. And she'd say, here, and I'll show you, puppy. And she would turn the light switch on and off. And I said, no, I want to know how the electricity got in there. And that's when she said, uh-oh. So I think it's been kind of a lifelong pursuit. Certainly I didn't know what a physicist was until much later, like in college, I guess. Right. But so it's been a lifelong pursuit. There have been moments in my life where, I could have gone one direction or the other, and always was fortunate to have opportunities to be able to continue my pursuit as a physicist. So for that, I'm very thankful, because not everybody who wants to be a physicist or scientist ends up being one. I just have been blessed to have been given those opportunities.
Yeah. Well, the thing that jumps out from what you said is that you came out of the womb with a sense of questioning, and I think that's where science begins, this deep sense of questioning. And speaking of a deeper sense of questioning, I think a lot of people come out of the womb wondering, how did I get here? And so this whole thing, spirit, purpose and meaning that people and philosophers end up searching for all of their lives. And I guess in the history of humanity, there was kind of a progression of philosophers and theologians and then coming the scientific revolution and, of course, leading to physics. But some see a conflict between science and religion. But from what I've read from you and what I understand, you don't really see this kind of conflict. Is that right?
I certainly don't see it in myself, any conflict within myself. I think you're correct in pointing out that in the public square, there certainly has been set up this I would say artificial conflict between faith and reason. But certainly with me as a man, I've these two halves of me, one seeking God and the other seeking to understand His creation, or that's just like looking at the world with two eyes. Mm-hmm. It's not, nothing about it is in conflict. And I'd say that's kind of the natural state of affairs for people. I think it's only recently that there's been, I guess starting in the late, the 18th century, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, they started to divide this worldview into two, conflicting pieces. But that's not, I'd say, the natural state of affairs. It certainly doesn't make the most sense to me. Mm-hmm.
Well, that brings up the issue of where we are today, where with the coronavirus and all this conflict between mask wearing and not mask wearing, and scientific evidence and conflicts between people who just come out and say they don't even believe in science.
Yeah, right. That's the other side of this this coin is that when you set up this conflict, you turn people away from science. There are people out there who are using science as kind of a cudgel to beat people away from trying to find God. And when you do that, people of faith see that and say, well, gee, I don't believe anything this guy says. And so then there's like this other camp of believers who turn away from science, and that's also wrong. Clearly we've been made with a brain, with a mind that's naturally seeking out and trying to understand our place in the world. But we're also made with a soul. And so those are the two halves of what it means to be a human being. So it's just unnatural to kind of tear those apart, and you can see the effect of it. It's not good.
Yeah, and you were mentioning that we have a soul, and so there's this emergent quality to human beings where you have the fact that you could say we're biological beings, and but at the same time, that biology and biochemistry, even starting all the way back at physics, starting at the fundamental particles, you build up the biology that we all understand that makes us biological beings, and then biochemical beings. And then this consciousness emerges from that. And then in even deeper sense, you mentioned a soul emerges from that. And I think sometimes it seems in science, you focus on just the one thing, the physical, the biological. And even though scientists understand there's this emergent quality, if I can use that term, that leads to something even deeper. So you have scientists like Richard Dawkins, among others, who are molecular biologists or evolutionary biologists that go out of their way to emphasize that there is no spiritual connection, there is no God, there is no such thing as religion or a soul or anything like that. What do you say to somebody like Richard Dawkins, who's a fellow scientist?
Well, I mean, I guess you could just pull any human being, in the history of all mankind and ask them if they feel like they're a machine made out of meat. And I'd say the answer would be no, unless they're not feeling very well. No, I mean, I think it's nonsense, but it comes from putting science, in place of God, in the sense that it has all the answers, when clearly it doesn't. And that's the demonstrable thing, that it's so easy to prove that science doesn't have all the answers. It doesn't answer the question why, which is kind of a big one for most folks. Why are we here? But surely it has allowed us to explore deep into the fabric of the universe, far beyond what we can see with our own eyes. And and if you look at what's really going on here, I mean, me and you are having this conversation right now on different continents. We're both conscious, and we're both made of the remnants of supernovas. And the reason we're able to exist is because of the way that the physics of the universe works. And as you say, here we are, self-aware pieces of creation, having these discussions about meaning. I'm sorry, but science doesn't answer the question, why is that happening? It answers the question how this is happening, and that is just like beyond belief, right? It's just amazing that the world is so beautiful, and it's been made in a sense for us to exist. We exist in the world because the way the world works, but it doesn't say who put us here or why. And those are the kinds of questions that science just doesn't answer. And even in our everyday lives, you don't have to be a scientist to experience love. Mm-hmm. And love is a concrete, it is something that exists. It is an objective reality that just can't be explained by science. So it's not, there are things that concretely exist in our world, mm-hmm. that just are not able to be answered by science. And that's fine. Science is not supposed to be able to do that. But we have these other questions about our lives too.
So if you look at science as a tool to answer questions about how, and then when you get into the how, then these layers are peeled back, and you get an even deeper sense of the wonder of it all, is the way that I put it. And it makes you question even more. And the sense of wonderment gives you a deeper appreciation for just being alive, and that you're actually living a miracle. And so the how is just gives you an deeper sense of the spiritual nature of existence, and sometimes this leading to questions of why that are just unanswerable by science. But it doesn't keep us from continuing that quest to know more.
Right. Yeah. So the guys, these, I guess I would sort of brand them as somewhat militant atheists. We're trying to turn people away from trying to find God, or it's just really sad, but it's also, they're really just doing a disservice to scientists, because what they're doing is, in a sense, it's anti-scientific to put science in place of God. That's just not what science is about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to turn to the how and a deeper question. I know that you are one of the many teams that worked on the discovery of the Higgs field and the Higgs boson. And the reason I'm having you on the show and talking to you about this is because at one point, as you're aware, the Higgs boson or particle was called the God particle. Of course, which was ridiculous, but unfortunately, somebody coined that phrase, and the press picked it up. But the Higgs field, or the Higgs and the Higgs boson, which is manifested within the Higgs field, is extremely important to science. Was an extremely important discovery in terms of the mechanism that gives mass to particles like the electron. Not all particles. I want to emphasize here that not all particles get their mass from the Higgs field, but you work on some of that instrumentation with respect to that. Why was that important? Why was it important to science, or even our understanding of how things work, for this discovery of the Higgs field to be made? Why was that so important? Yeah.
Before I get to that, I want to tell you a story that I had heard from one of my friends about this coining of the phrase, the God particle, and maybe some enterprising podcaster can delve into this and find out if it's true or not. But Leon Letterman, who was a Nobel Prize winner and a scientist at Fermilab, had been interviewed by a journalist about how hard it had been to find this Higgs field, this Higgs particle, and that's certainly true, and that's part of what I'll tell you about. And he said, it's just been so hard to find this G-dom particle, this goddamn particle, and the journalist just called it the God particle after that, and kind of ticked off Leon Letterman. That's the story I heard. But it has been true that it's been really hard to find. It was proposed by theorists in the late 1960s, and we didn't find it until 2012. And it wasn't for lack of trying. And it's an important, in the theory of the standard model part of particle physics that we have, to make that model of physics work, so to speak. But its physical role, as you say, is to generate the masses of the particles that carry the electroweak force, the nuclear weak force, and then it turns out it looks like it's also the particle that generates the masses of some of the other types of matter particles, like the electron and its sister particles. And without that mechanism, the standard model that we understand today, which just wouldn't work. We would have to kind of tear it apart and start again with something else. And we didn't know what was right and what was wrong, because it took us so long to find it. Many folks thought it wouldn't be possible to find it, or that it was wrong. And in order to find, the search started in the 1960s and marched forward through time, and we needed sort of ever more powerful particle colliders create the conditions where we might excite this Higgs field and produce this particle and observe its decay. And we finally did that, but it took us, like I said, these many years. And in order to observe these things, like I said, you can't perceive these events with your eyes. You need to build these really powerful particle detectors that are sort of like super fast digital cameras that are taking a three-dimensional movie, so to speak, of the little nuclear explosion that happens when the protons in the particle beams collide right in the heart of your detector apparatus. And the job of those detectors that we build is to create that image, to create that picture, so to speak, so that we can peel back those layers of the onion to see and peer deep inside, right where that happened, to look for the evidence of this Higgs boson. And so to do that takes a lot of work and a lot of time. And that's why it literally took thousands of physicists and engineers working together over the course of decades in order to do it. And I guess we did it because we were all motivated by this common desire across, I would say, all different nationalities and ethnicities and religions, motivated by this common desire to understand this fundamental nature of the universe. I think that pursuit, that common pursuit together, is really maybe one of our greatest achievements, greater than even finding this Higgs particle.
Yeah, I mean, all of the scientists and the sense of cooperation that happened was just absolutely tremendous. If I can get down in the weeds for a minute, I'm really interested in what happens to, and so are many of my students, if you will, that attend my seminars here in Ecuador, in the southern part of the hemisphere where I live. We did a seminar on this, and we talked about these protons colliding. And many people, including myself, I have to admit, thought that what was happening is that these protons would collide and you would get pieces of things. And one of the pieces of things that you got was actually the Higgs particle. Was a piece of something that flew out of this collision. And that's one notion. And I talked to another theoretical physics friend of mine who worked on this extensively, and he explained. And if I can read to you his response, this will just take a second, but I'm really interested in understanding this and my listeners understanding this kind of detail. He said to me that my understanding of, two protons colliding and then producing pieces or constituent parts, he said was kind of right, but I was missing the detail. And he says, well, how does the energy in the protons get converted into disturbing the Higgs field? And he said that the answer is that a sufficiently energetic disturbance in the top quark field can make the Higgs field ripple. And the gluons can generate a strong disturbance in the top quark field. And he says this is because top quarks interact quite strongly with both the gluons field and the Higgs field. And he says, notice this has nothing to do with who is a constituent of who. In fact, gluons and top quarks and Higgs particles are not constituents of one another. They are quite independent. And this is the important part of what he's saying. He said the notion here is similar to how a singer vibrates her vocal cords, which makes the air vibrate, which in turn makes a glass vibrate even to the point of breaking. And so he says some of the energy, it's the energy in the proton-proton collision, is being transferred by interactions from the gluon field to the top quark field, and finally the Higgs field. And so it's the energy that produces, I guess he's saying, that actually causes these fields to interact with each other. And then you get this final, if you have enough energy, you get this vibration in the Higgs field, and this disturbance or ripple in the Higgs field is manifested as a particle or the boson that you were looking for. Is that right?
I'd say that's pretty close. Yeah, I mean, what's even physicists in college sort of misuse the analogy of these particle collisions being like, what happens if you collide together two cars going really fast together? What you get is like, an explosion of car parts everywhere, right? And that's actually in classical mechanics. That's in fact what would happen if protons were classical objects like cars. But instead, what's going on is something that I'd say probably all your listeners have heard of: E equals mc squared, the equation that equates E, energy, with m, mass. So they're interchangeable in a sense, and so that's what's happening. We're taking the kinetic energy, the energy from the extremely fast motion of the protons, and when you collide them together, what you in effect are doing is converting portion of that kinetic energy, that energy of the proton, not just its kinetic energy, but all of the energy contained in that proton into m, and that becomes the way in relativistic quantum mechanics that you're converting these two things together. And you're right. What happens is sometimes, there are different ways to produce these Higgs particles. It turns out there's not just one unique way, and that's part of the fun of studying this Higgs particle is how is it produced. But one of the ways is to make a virtual top quark. And then with this energy, this E equals mc squared, this energy that can produce a virtual top quark from the interactions of the constituents of the protons, which are made of gluons and up and down quarks. And then you excite this scalar field that permeates the universe, this Higgs field, and can pop out a Higgs particle. But the Higgs particles are very unstable, and it immediately decays into other matter particles, which then that's what we detect. We detect with our apparatus the decay products of the Higgs particle, which we can see. We can't see the Higgs directly. All we can see is what the Higgs decayed into. And so then you can reconstruct, point backwards to where this happened. Say it decayed into a pair of muons, which in fact we just recently have made a measurement of. You can detect those muon particles, track them backwards using our detector to that point, and measure the fundamental like the energy and momentum and direction and things like that of the Higgs particle when it decayed. So that is what we're doing.
That is just absolutely fascinating. I just wanted our listeners to hear that. I know it's down in the weeds, but I kind of wanted to disabuse people of the notion, as you say, of the classical sense of two cars colliding and you get these individual car pieces. But we're talking about relativistic physics here and what happens on the quantum level when these particles end up colliding. So do you think we'll end up seeing any new physics when the LHC fires up again, when the Large Hadron Collider fires up again?
Well, I think if you ask any physicist on the streets of Geneva, Switzerland, or Washington, D.C., where I am, the answer would be yes, I hope so. But we have to see what God has in store for us. We don't know. That's why they call it searching instead of finding. But there's certainly, what is true is that we know there are things that we don't know. And so therefore, we're going to find somehow, one of these days, maybe it's in the next few years with the Large Hadron Collider, maybe it's our children. There are just things we know that we don't know, and we have to find them. For example, dark matter and the standard model of particle physics itself is not complete. So there's plenty of things we don't understand. So we are. That's one of the reasons we upgraded the accelerator complex and our detectors, is to give it to give us more sensitivity to open the window a little further, which we wouldn't have otherwise have had access to. And so whenever you do that, now you're exploring, unknown territory. It's so that's what we're doing now. We're exploring that extra little piece of unknown territory, and you can always find something when you're exploring something new. So that's what we're doing.
Understand. Well, we only have 1 minute left, and so I'm going to ask you a relatively difficult philosophical, spiritual, scientific question, because I get often in my seminars. So Jesus performed many miracles that are chronicled in the Bible, and many deeply religious and spiritual people, of course, believe and understand that those miracles happen, but they often ask the how question. Is that a legitimate area for science to probe, since science asks how this happens? And do you think that kind of question will ever be answered, or even should be answered?
Well, sometimes yes, and sometimes no. And there are certainly people who are 1,000 times more qualified at this. First, I mean, just to let your listeners know, I am a Roman Catholic, and I believe in teachings of the church and the miracles that Jesus performed, and those are true. But I don't think science can explain all of these types of things. And if you just think about the miracle of creation itself as kind of like the very first one, like the universe exists. I mean, the universe came into existence out of absolutely nothing. It wasn't like space and time was empty and there was a pile of stuff that blew up. There was no space and no time, and there was nothing. And then it came into existence. So if there was a creator, which such an event, the Big Bang, seems to point that, yes, this is a scientific fact that the universe came into existence this way. If there were a creator that initiated that, then this creator must be outside of the universe itself. And so therefore, these miracles, if coming from God, would be coming from the creator who's outside of the universe and is in control of these things. So that I guess would be my scientific soul's or mind's view of what's going on here, is that all things are possible with God. And some of the attempts to explain these things scientifically, I think, are a little misguided. But some of them could be true. Like there's going to be a convergence of Saturn and Jupiter here in December, which only happens quite rarely. I think the last time was 400 years, and it'll be unresolvable with the naked eye, and will look like an extremely bright star in the sky. And some people are saying, well, maybe this is one of the explanations of the Star of Bethlehem that you find in the Gospels when Jesus was born. So that could be a possible scientific explanation for that thing. But in fact, what's the important thing is not that appearance of the star, is the appearance of this baby. And so that's the miracle that we focus on as Christians at this time of year.
And important to reflect upon this time of the year.
Yeah.
Well, Aaron, Dr. Dominguez, thank you so much for joining us and giving us of your time. I know you've got to run to another meeting. You have an awful lot of duties there at the Catholic University, and so we appreciate you being with us this morning.
Well, Don, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. This has been really fun.
Yeah, and let's stay in touch. It was just great to meet you, and I'm glad Susie put us together. And you have a wonderful rest of the day. And she says hello, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Susie. Hi, Ron. All right. We'll see you soon. God bless. Have a good Christmas.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us on this episode of Life is a Story We Tell Ourselves. Our next podcast will feature a story about police presence on public high school campuses. Our guest will be Will Jawando. Mr. Jawando is a Montgomery County Council member who offers an alternative to police on public high school campuses. So be sure to join us. As always, stay safe, share happiness, and remember, never stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing.